Thank you, Sherry, for and Kevin for having me today, and thank you all for attending. I'm fighting a bit of a cold here, so please pardon my cough if that comes up as we go along. This program is really all about that intersection of where strategy meets governance, and I'll looking forward to sharing with you about that topic. This is a little bit about my background. I used to be an association executive long time ago and kind of came up that way, and then started LBL Strategies in 1985. I'm not going to put you through all this, but I've worked on probably 2,700 strategic planning and management projects over the years, and have done a lot of work related to the Association for Strategic Planning, preparing people to sit for certification. I am an Army veteran, and we're a veterans-owned business. So what do we do? Generally we position ourselves as leaders in this discipline of strategy management. We operate certification programs currently with George Washington University. All of our courses are really about helping our customers focus, make better decisions, and grow. There's the ASP Rep certificate logo, our partnership GW, Veteran Zone, and ATD. We operate 2 university certification programs and are getting ready to start a 3rd one. The first one is about mastering strategy. It covers the entire strategy management process. We have a 5-day in-person boot camp. We have an online live program that begins again February 23rd, 10 1.5-hour sessions. We have a self-study program that's available 24/7. And then our favorite is we love creating hybrid programs and tailoring them to a particular industry. Last fall, we also started a certification program in mastering agile organization design. We're getting ready to start our 2nd cohort in March. This one again is offered in a 5-day boot camp format, an online live format, and then again hybrid. I was just mentioning to Sherry that later this spring we'll also be launching a course in scenario planning, kind of how to teaching folks how to run scenario planning workshops. So that's who I am, what we do. Let me start with kind of level setting here. If you put 25 people in a room who do what I do day in, day out, we can all generally agree that there are really 6 phases to the discipline of strategy management. There's that first day on the job, getting organized, and then looking at the environment, formulating where we want to go. Phase 4, how we're going to get there. And then phase 5 is where the real value is in execution. And then lastly, performance management. What I'm hoping to share with you today, and again, you feel free to ask questions anytime via chat. Sherry, Kevin, you're welcome to interrupt me at any time. But I do hope that I can expand your understanding of strategy management to a certain extent here today. But primarily, I want to talk about the board of directors' role, their responsibilities, and best practices in the association field. There's 2 sides to every coin: the board, the staff. Both sides have to do their job for things to move forward. I'm sure most of you are aware of Board Source. They have a nice little publication called The 10 Responsibilities of the Board of Directors. And 3 of them are listed here. But I'm going to focus today on this establishing strategic direction, and then also about monitoring and strengthening programs. I want to start by just talking about this continuum from boards of directors that are more of a phantom board, all the way up to catalyst boards. Phantom boards, they really exist on paper. Rubber stamp boards, they're more about just, whatever the exec says, that's what we're going to do. Some boards, practice minimal review. They'll look at selected issues. that staff bring to their participation. We have boards that are more nominal participation, the degree to which they really get involved. Okay, some key decisions, manage some of the indicators and selectively look at programs. But then towards the right-hand side, where we get into really active, high involvement, active participation, just being on an active committee structure, really making final decisions, overseeing their fiduciary responsibilities and perform fiscal oversight. And then there's the catalyst boards. They take the role in everything. Oftentimes we'll see a catalyst board in volunteer organizations. So one of the things I'd like for you to do just for a moment now is really take a second or two just to think about, where is it does your board fall across this continuum? Where do you fit? And then I want you to kind of keep that in mind as we go through the rest of the morning. I'm going to make sure you all get the slide deck following the session. There were a couple slides that I think we mailed out ahead of time. And this is just a helpful thing to understand. If we talk about strategy, what level of involvement is our board involved in? The board of directors continuum. Years ago, it finally dawned on me that we were getting called in oftentimes to help with the strategy, only to find out that there were governance issues. Other times we would be called in to, we want to strengthen the governance of our board, whatever it might be, only to find out that strategy is an issue. And I kept seeing this over and over and over again, hearing about CEOs that are micromanaging the board, or boards that are trying to function and override the staff. And it just leads to all kinds of dysfunctionality. Any of you that have been in the association space for any time, looking across organizations, I'm sure you've witnessed this. So I put together this chart and validated it with some of our customers, and it's resonated over the years. What you see along the horizontal axis here are those 6 phases of strategy management. And then on the other axis is the level of involvement. What level of involvement do the board and the staff have? And you can see early on here, this is primarily the administrative staff organizing the process, figure out where they're going to do it, how they're going to do it. But as we move into phases 2 and 3, the board's role grows dramatically. The board is the one who has to ultimately approve the strategy of the organization. As we move into phase 4, where we're actually completing the operating plan, what we're going to be doing in the next year, what are we going to be measuring, what initiatives are we going to undertake, what's the budget that goes along with it, then the board's role really dramatically falls off. Certainly they're kept informed, but then we come to execution, actually making it happen, and that's the purview of the staff. And then the board's role, again, it grows as we get into measuring and managing performance. So this is what I'm going to be drilling down into for the rest of this session. So in phase 1 of strategy management, this is where we really assess at a high level, is the current strategy working? What's the capabilities of our organization? And then based on what the needs are, that's oftentimes defined by the exec, the CEO, is designing and organizing a program, a strategy management program to move us forward. That's what happens in phase 1. This corresponds here. What's going on in phase 1? And the first thing that I want to highlight, once you kind of know how you're going to approach this, is to do kind of scoping the process. And what you'll see along the left-hand side here, this is, these are all the elements of what I would include in a strategy management system. Strategy management is about strategic thinking, systems thinking, and all of these elements are what I look for when an organization says, we want to really be strategically focused. We want to not treat strategic planning just as a project, but how do we turn this into ongoing process? And then what you do is, highlight what's already been developed, what needs to be developed, where work is needed. Maybe we've done some things, and then there's other things that have never been done before. And this kind of helps to define the scope. And then over here, we can talk about what time of the year we're going to be doing it. You're going to see as we go along that each of these are labeled. So this is primarily a staff role. Maybe the board chairman or chair of the strategic planning committee might sit in on a conversation. But largely, this is something that staff does. Certainly, it's important to make sure when you start talking to your board about strategic planning and management is to be able to define the scope and help them understand what's going to happen when. So I want you to take a moment now, and if you've gotten this slide ahead of time, I'd like for you to just take a quiet moment now and just think about this. Take a couple notes. What pieces do you have in place? Where do you need to build on some work that's been started? What kinds of things just need to be developed? Taking this assessment up front, understanding what are the needs. What if we're going to be strategically focused, where is it that we can improve our system? So this little tool that we call the gap analysis tool is really super helpful when you're first getting organized. So maybe think about, what kind of boards you've got. Are they actively involved or, nominal involvement? Think about what pieces of a strategy management system we have in place, because that really does lay the groundwork then for moving into the next phase. And the next phase, strategy is all about outside in. What's going on in the external environment that we need to pay attention to? What is it that we need to build on from a competency point of view internally? And then ultimately some way of prioritizing where we're going to focus. This occurs in this phase here. We can begin to see as we're looking externally, looking internally, this is where we want the board to begin starting to weigh in. They're out in the marketplace. Maybe if your members are organizations, they know what's happening in their industry. If they're more individual memberships, they have insights too about, what are the trends? Where are the opportunities? What are our capabilities? Where do we have gaps? So certainly this is something that board and staff both participate in. Once we've got a handle on the, particularly the external environment, it's really the board's role to start doing some good strategic thinking. We see all these trends coming at us. We can certainly talk about trends for a long time. We have down here our stakeholders, but what we want to be able to do is really derive from that and prioritize what are the opportunities and threats. Many of you or all of you may be aware of something that's been historically referred to as SWOT analysis. We've kind of turned that on our head because strategies from the outside in. So we prioritize opportunities and threats before strengths and weaknesses. And clearly the board has a primary role to play here. Very frequently, I'll include either a large subsection of the board and a cross section of the staff, and together begin to prioritize where are we going to focus in terms of our opportunities and threats. So boards definitely has a role to play here. Excuse me. The world we live in right now is so darn uncertain. Who knows where things are really going? And in periods of increased uncertainty, the board's role in terms of thinking is very important. Too oftentimes what we do is just extrapolate from today to thinking, well, things may continue the same, and then build our plan around that. But I find that staff and board both benefit from looking at these spaces of uncertainty. Today's perspective is today's perspective, but there's so many things as we look out into the future that can change. So there's alternative scenarios that can unfold. To be prudent, to enable ourselves to be able to adapt as things unfold. One of the things that staff with board who are deeply involved in this kind of thing, to the extent you can get them involved, is to think through these alternative scenarios, that enable us to be able to say, all right, we're not quite sure where things are going, but if we look at these, explore what the key factors are, what are going to be the key drivers of success in each scenario, we better prepare ourselves as things unfold. Again, staff will probably take the lead here. Staff are the ones that oftentimes have the bigger picture of the entire industry that you represent in your organization, but your board members likely come from your industry. So this is a great way to build consensus about moving forward depending on what the situation is. So staff and board. Board now, you see that up in the right-hand corner, I've got it board staff. Here it's very important for the board to be deeply involved in defining the customer value proposition. What is the value that your members receive from being a member of your organization, right? Taking advantage of your project, of your products and services in exchange for what they have to spend in terms of money, time, effort. A customer value proposition can sometimes be used to recruit staff. It can be used as a marketing statement going forward. But the board should be deeply involved in defining what it is that our customer, what the value is we provide to our customers, whether it's our primary customers, the large organizations, or a group that has a number of individual members, your customers, and then very importantly as well, your key stakeholders. Defining the value you provide to your customers is something the board should be deeply involved in, internalizing it, sharing it across the board, making sure that all board members understand this value up and down the line. And just thinking this through is something time well spent for your board. In phase 3, after we've gotten ourselves organized and we've understood the environment, we've done some prioritizing. Now in phase 3, it's all about defining the direction. Where are we headed? Establishing a strategy to get there. And this for sure is where we have major board involvement. Certainly the staff have their input, particularly at the senior level, but this is where the board has the responsibility of really defining where it is that we are going. Now, how do you do that? Well, it's really a synthesis process of looking at those opportunities and threats, looking at your core competencies, what makes you special, looking at that value proposition, understanding what came from, excuse me, from doing scenario planning, and then going through some type of discovery process. And out of that comes the definition. Where is it we're headed? What does success look like? Why do we exist? What is our purpose? What are those core values that guide us or need to guide us or must guide us going forward? What are the 1 or 2 primary overarching goals? And then what's the high level strategy to get there? These are all conversations that the board should be deeply involved in. Certainly the staff supports, certainly staff has input, but this discovery process, this definition of these elements largely falls to the board of directors. So to summarize, just so nomenclature oftentimes can be a real stumbling block here. When it comes to defining the vision of the organization, that's the board's role. And when it comes to defining the mission, that is the board's role. When we come to core values, that's a shared responsibility. That is absolutely a shared responsibility. Staff need to have their input in there just as much as the board do, but do that together. Laying out any strategic policies. A few years ago, I was working with an industry association in the food sector. And they decided, their board of directors decided, is the only way we're going to go internationally is if one of our current customers takes us there. And that was like a decision that was made up front. As we get into all this, we start talking about international, everybody needs to understand we're not going international unless one of our current customers, current members themselves are going there and we can help them. That's an example of a strategic policy that boards determine. And then lastly, if you think about this idea of a mountain, and at the very apex of the mountain is the vision. That's we're trying to reach the top of the mountain. Well, an overarching goal, again, one or two of these, the long term, it's like making it halfway up the mountain. If we make it to that overarching goal or two, we're well on our way to achieving our vision. But this, you can see, this element, these elements are largely the responsibilities of the board. Not that staff, senior staff don't have something to say, or the board won't want to hear what you have to say, but ultimately when it comes to deciding, this is the responsibility of the board of directors. In phase four, now we're going to build the strategic plan. This is not, we know where we're headed. We know what our one or two main goals are. Well, now we begin to develop a longer term strategic plan and a nearer term, what I would call a strategic operating plan, what we're going to do in the next year. And you can begin to see that, board still has a role here, particularly in this task one, strategic planning. But when it gets into building the strategic operating plan, now the staff role grows in importance. If the staff is going to be held accountable for achieving the results that the board decides that this is what we're trying to accomplish, then the staff needs to have the authority then to do what is needed to achieve those outcomes. So this is very much a shared responsibility between board and staff when we get to strategic planning. There are two elements, as I mentioned. The longer term, this is more board. The near term, this is more staff. So this partnership to get across this bridge takes both the board and the staff collaborating, integrating, trusting one another, openly sharing, and partnering to get the job done. Long-term board, short-term staff. Okay, I want to show you a little case study now. I made this up just to make sure I had a concrete example here that I could share with you. So this is a group called the Chicagoland Gas Association, and they had an overarching goal to become recognized advocate for convenience store products and gasoline dispensing services in the western suburbs of Chicago. That was their overarching goal that they're trying to achieve. The question becomes, and again, this is a board staff responsibility now, is to begin to identify what I would refer to as the key drivers of success. What are those areas that we must generate results in if we're going to achieve this overarching goal? So, and they can be anything. I mean, I picked some generic examples now: growth capital, efficiency, strengthening the advocacy program, doing a better job of marketing and branding, strengthening customer service, really building our staff. So once we know what the vision, the mission, the goals are, we then begin to ask ourselves, what are those key drivers? This is something that your board is definitely going to want to be involved in. They're not going to want to be told, okay, here's where we need to focus. They're going to want to listen to you. They're going to want to have their input as well. And together we define what are those key drivers of success. Once we know what those are and the intended results, we can begin to put together what I would refer to as a strategy map. A strategy map points out the cause and effect relationships. I mean, if you go back to the previous slide, and I color coded them, and I've carried those color codings over here now, and really for each of those key drivers, what are the intended results? Well, if we improve our association management skills of our employees, that's going to drive the ability to improve employee customer service. It's going to help improve our efficiency. Both of these are going to help in our branding. If we can do a better job of marketing and branding, that'll enable us to provide enhanced advocacy services, and it'll drive sponsor participation, and together efficiency, sponsor participation, improving advocacy. They'll enable us to lower our costs, increase our membership, and then drive liquid capital that can help grow the association. So here's that goal. We've got a target of 250 profitable members in 5 years. This is the communication tool that the board should internalize. Once these cause and effect relationships have been defined, this is what they should be talking about when they're out in the community, talking to other members of the association. When someone asks, what is your strategy? You pull out this slide. You tell them about the longer term vision or mission, but then you take them through this process. So should staff. As staff is being recruited, or funding sources are being pursued, or key stakeholder communications are occurring, this communication tool I have found to be the very best tool to help others understand, not only what we're trying to accomplish, but how we're going to do it. It begins to show how the staff and committees fit into this notion of strategy. So that's just a quick example. Central to building this plan is having an accountability model in place. There's certainly a level that staff and board work together on, but when we're talking about, let's say we have a strategy map that has 8 objectives. Every objective should have an objective owner and people that are on that team working towards that outcome, tracking KPIs, defining initiatives, coordinating across functions that are related to the objective. So in this case, we've got 4 objectives. This is all the responsibility of the CEO, the executive director, defining these accountabilities. Oftentimes there'll be somebody on staff that kind of coordinates strategy, and then this reports up to the CEO, who reports to the board. So, we can look at it from a bottom up, it's largely staff here, but we can look at it from the top down, the governance of the organization, holding the CEO, empowering them, and then holding she or he accountable for the results. So this is what I mean by having a clear accountability model that everyone understands. It's a shared responsibility. Something else that I see all too often, just all too often, is organizations, I'll just characterize it, putting 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag. Everybody's way too busy already doing what they're doing before we update our strategic plan. And then new initiatives come out of the strategic planning process that oftentimes gets layered on top of existing responsibilities. That's not a formula for success. So what I encourage now, and this is largely a staff exercise, but board can certainly be kept closely informed, particularly your leadership, is you make a listing of what are things that we're doing that we might stop doing. If we can free up resources by stopping to do certain things and then take those resources and allocate them to the new strategy, we're much more likely to be successful. So you have a program or a product or even a process, anything that's taking time and resources, and you begin to say, okay, does this particular activity, let's refer to it as our as our safety program, if you will. Does the work, the safety program, have direct or impact on our strategy? If the answer is yes, then we go on. Does it or will the work easily attract funding or outside support? Let's say the answer is yes. Are there many others doing this work? Let's say the answer is yes. Well, if there's many others doing it, is this work a good fit with our core competencies? Yes, it is. Well, then strategically, what we might come to is that we need to build on this strength as a way to differentiate. But when we go yes, yes, no, no, there aren't others doing it. Yes, it fits our core competency. That's more of a blue ocean now. We're in uncontested market space. So you can see how this tool works. We call it cut before you add. It's a great way to bring people together, look at what we're doing, acknowledge that we only have so many resources, and are there some things that we can quit doing before we start layering on new work? You'll notice this pillar here that's got the blue label at the top. If we're dealing with a for-profit company, then this is about profitability. But that's not necessarily the case in a nonprofit and association. Here we're really talking about, is it going to attract support from stakeholders or going to enable us to bring in some new funding sources? But this is a staff-led, board kept informed activity. When we stop doing things, it's best to keep the board informed. So, I'm not talking about every little granular thing, but if we're going to stop a program, we use in one of our courses about a year and a half ago, we presented this tool. It was an association, and they took it to heart, and we meet once a week in this particular iteration. They came back the next week and decided to close one of their offices. Just boom, within a week, they made the decision to close one of their offices to be able to free up those resources to put behind the new strategy. Again, staff and board. Communication, boy, oh boy. This is something that certainly falls on the staff and the board. From the very beginning, who's going to be on the planning team? What's the planning process look like? We're keeping everyone informed. What is it that we're going to prioritize? Are we aligned on what strengths we're going to build on, what opportunities we're going to take advantage of? We're asking people, did we miss something? We're listening. This is a good time to go back out to a subset of your membership, just to kind of do a gut check to make sure we're on the right page. Do all of our stakeholders embrace where we're headed, the vision of success for the future? We should be communicating about that, not waiting to the end of the process, sharing with people, listening, taking information in. Are we aligned? Have we brought people along? So on how we're going to get there, the strategic plan, does it make sense? Are we all aligned behind it? Are there obstacles? Are we really ready to execute? Communicate. If we're doing good communication all along this journey, the probability of being successful at execution goes up dramatically. I've seen it over and over again when the priority is placed on communication. And the board's role, they're the voice. They're the voice of the organization to really communicate where we're headed to the key players in our community, and in order to try and enhance our image, enhance our brand, our public standing. This is both a staff and a board role. Some of this is pretty detailed for the board, but if we brought them along through the previous tasks, when we get to here, we should be in pretty good shape. In phase 5, this is execution now. Execution is really where the value is. The strategic planning is the easy part. Execution is the hard part. And now we're in staff world. If we're going to have board members involved in execution, they need to understand that they're really functioning as volunteer staff, and us as such report to the CEO. When we're executing, that's the responsibility of the key leader of the organization. And the extent to which staff or board are involved, they need to understand they're there as volunteer staff. When we do this right, it could lead to alignment. By that, I mean, we're building accountability collectively as an organization for going out and doing what we said we're going to do. When people understand how they fit in to the strategy, and this is where the strategy map really helps, much more likely to be successful. It increases when people see how they fit in and how others fit in. Your role as an association executive is to integrate the pieces, the people, the technology, operations, all that across and down through the organization. When we move into execution, before we've really gotten to this alignment, this is where the things oftentimes goes wrong. And this is what really drove development of our Agile Org Design course, because it's all about getting everything aligned, not just the structure, but the people, the technology, and all. So at this level, it's the board's role to ask questions, making sure that we're aligned. And really, it has a lot to do with cadence. How fast do we need to change? Strategy is not about staying the same. Strategy is always about change. But how fast do we need to change? Well, this is a colleague of mine, a guy named Robin Speculin, and he knows as much about execution as anyone I've ever met. And Robin makes the point that it's a function of the industry that you're in. I mean, I'm a farm boy originally in agriculture. While it's changing, commodity agriculture, the speed at which it's changing is historically has not been fast. The sense of urgency that farmers placed on changing, I do it the way my grandpa used to do it. That mindset has been there forever. But you get up into banking, telecoms, insurance, technology, wow, there's a great sense of urgency to need to change. And the market leaders are moving quickly. So when you're thinking about execution with your board, one of the key questions is, how fast do we need to change? How fast do we need to evolve towards this new desired future state? It doesn't do any good to go faster than the key players and the industry is changing. And if we get too far out there, we can run into real trouble. But understanding how fast we need to change is something the board and staff should consider. I want to show you a little video now. You may have seen this before, but it really makes the point about what I'm trying to get at here in terms of the importance of alignment in execution. On May 25th, 1961, I had just turned 11 years old. I was in grade school, and the principal walked into the classroom, turned on this little black and white TV, and this is what came on.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
A few weeks after, actually, I think it was about 3 months, I've heard different versions of this story. But about 3 months later, there was a group of reporters that traveled to Nassau to see how things were moving along. What kind of progress would be made? Where were the obstacles? And they had their debrief with the leadership of NASA. And as they were leaving the facility as a group, one of the reporters was kind of falling behind, and he was kind of nosing around a little bit, and he looked in a window of one of the rooms off the coast of off the corridor, and he saw this one guy in an empty room vacuuming the floor. And he went into him and said, what is your job? And the man turned to him and said, my job is to put a man on the moon and bring him home safely. He knew that if the dust that was in the floor somehow got into the orbiter that had been was going to be assembled in this room, it could jeopardize the whole mission. This is the key point related to execution. Does your team, and when I say team, the board and the staff have clear line of sight? We all know what we're trying to get to. When we're asked the question where we're going, we give virtually the same answer. This is alignment. This is alignment. Alignment can be also looked at in a different sort of way. This is, again, a make-believe example. We call it Amy's Ice Cream Palace. And it had a vision to make the world a better place, one scoop at a time. It had an overarching goal to increase its market share. One of the objectives was to increase brand awareness at the enterprise level, at the association level, at the company level. And then there's this idea of OKRs, objectives and key results. I'm not going to really talk much about that today, but you might want to look into OKRs. Their use is growing significantly to facilitate agility. So in this case, in the next 90 days, the head of IT, we're going to increase website traffic by 30%. And then the webmaster had an OKR of increasing Google ranking of best ice cream in Chicago to page 1 in the next 90 days. When we're down here at this bottom level, this is certainly all staff. But when we're at the top, this is the board. But again, we're looking for that alignment, for that clear line of sight about what I'm doing will help my unit do what it needs to do to achieve the outcomes the board has established in order to achieve that halfway up the mountain goal, and then ultimately to get to that desired future state or vision. This is staff down here, board at the top. Implementing the strategic operating plan. A few years ago, I led a conference on what was called bridging the strategy execution gap. So I spent quite a lot of time looking at why strategy execution fails. And it really kind of came down to execution. And now we're at execution. This is staff. It is not well understood. Most of us have probably never taken a course in strategy execution. It's generally about strategic planning. Another major reason why we saw bad things occur is that leaders, they don't understand that implementation, it's complex. There's a number of dimensions that are unfolding at the same time. And board members need to be, staff members need to understand that. They don't understand oftentimes the role that the CEO plays. So, what's been your experience with the handoff from board to staff regarding strategy execution? We really don't have the time here today to dig into this, but I would encourage all of you to have this kind of group conversation with your team. What has been, think about what you're learning today or being exposed to today, and then back up with your team and talk about where things have worked, where things haven't worked related to strategy execution. It's a fascinating conversation. I know you'll have. Phase 6. Phase 6 is about performance management. Here the primary tasks are measuring performance, learning from what our metrics teach us and help us understand, and then the ongoing process of strategy management. Now here we are here. Now the board's role is growing again. We said we were going to accomplish these outcomes. Will we measure? Are we making progress? You want to work with your board then to be able to learn and adapt what we should do going forward. And then I'm going to talk about this kind of to finish up as an ongoing process. As I mentioned, I'm originally a farm boy. I've done all kinds of work in the U.S. soybean industry. This is client that I worked with off and on for 20 years, and called the Illinois Soybean Association. Every time a soybean farmer sells a bushel of soybeans, 0.5% of the value goes into this fund that gets invested back in the industry. So in this example, the overarching goal that they had is here: achieving maximum profitability and global competitive position. Here's the measure of success. In order to achieve that, the board and the staff said, well, what are we going to do? Well, if we can grow more beans per acre, that will contribute to achieving that overarching goal. So they have a KPI here is the profit margin per acre. And then level 3 is, what are we going to do to increase yield? Well, we're going to take this program called Profitability and Production Matters and share with growers best practices. And then we have measures at this level. So the board goal, board staff, those are set by the board and the staff together. At the initiative level, the metrics that we're tracking, that's exclusively a staff responsibility. Level 1, level 2, level 3. Here's a little example. You notice one of the outcomes is they want to develop the highest quality soybean oil and meal products. The KPI for this is the content of the oil and the protein. And you can see that for these 4 years, we never quite get to the green level. Yet all the work that we're doing from a project initiative level is all green. Well, when a board member sees that, they should be asking, why is everything still in the yellow zone? We're saying we're doing, everything's working well, but we don't seem to get out of the yellow zone. So what's going on? Why is that? Are we implementing the right projects? Are we setting the right targets? Have we got the right KPIs? And then lastly, now what are we going to do? Do we need to reevaluate what we're investing in? Do we need to move away from tracking these lagging indicators and really give ourselves some leading indicators? This is the kind of discussion that a board or board committees want to have about performance. In order to have that discussion, your board is going to need some type of dashboard. This has grown in importance in the strategy literature for some time now. Whatever those key indicators are, having a regular flow of information, so when your board meets, your committee meets, they can see where are we, so they can begin learning from what's working, what's not, beginning to adapt as we go along. So having a dashboard is real important going for your board to really fulfill their responsibilities. This is a quote from Kaplan and Norton. Kaplan and Norton are the folks that really developed the balanced scorecard. And what they're pointing out is things change. We got to monitor what's going on. But what we've been doing in the past may not work going forward. So that's where learning comes in. Looking at those metrics, what's working, what's not, being agile, adapting to the current circumstances. The board's role here is to think about the implication of how our performance is unfolding. Do we need to make changes? That's why phase 6, you begin to see that blue color come back into it, because it's the board's role to critique performance. As an ongoing, this is task 3 in phase 6. We're coming to the end here now. I find it's the key to really having a strategy management system is you have to have a strategy management calendar. The strategy management calendar really integrates reporting on how we did last year. The year ends, okay, that first quarter of the year, what worked last year, what didn't work. It's reporting out and planning for the current year that we're in. How are those projects working? Sharing that information with the board. And then it's planning for next year. So if you have, and this is a kind of a simplified version of a more detailed calendar, but something like this that the staff and the board work on together. You kind of start from, when does your board meet? And then you tie it back to that. But a strategy management calendar is something that, maybe your treasurer, because it needs to tie into the budgeting process, maybe the board chair or another key leader meets with the senior staff, and we define when we're going to do what during each time of the year. This is what will really contribute towards integrating strategy as a strategy management process. Okay, another question, I think really it's for anybody on that's an association executive. What's been your experience at managing this intersection of strategy and governance? Beginning to put together a few bullet points on what you can do to improve it going forward. This is a great conversation for the board chair and the CEO to really think about what can we do in these periods of uncertainty to improve strategy management. And given where we are right now, I'll take you back to that scenario planning discussion we had, points I was making a little earlier. With so much uncertainty, exploring what might happen, not trying to predict what is going to happen, maybe where you want to begin. Okay, I'm going to stop there, Sherry, Kevin, and stop sharing. This is where you can find me and yada, yada, yada. And then open it up for any questions that you'd like for me to respond to.
Great. Thanks so much. It was a great presentation. We really appreciate it. As you were talking, part of what we do on the consulting side with our consulting group, we get a lot of these people coming to us and they're like, Sherry, we've got this strategic plan and we don't know what to do with it. Right? Like that is the biggest, it's an ongoing problem. And so anyway, this was great. This was great information that you provided to help kind of solve for those issues. But we do have a few questions that I'm going to look at here. One was in the chat, so just give me a second so I can get back up to it. So somebody asked, what kind of icebreaker exercises can be used to get the board comfortable with opening up both new and more seasoned board members when entering a new strategic planning session?
Well, I'm not a real icebreaker kind of guy. I'm just not. I like to start with making sure everybody understands their roles and responsibilities. I mean, this is serious business we're talking about here. This is not about bonding. This is not about having a good social time. This is about charting the course for the organization, for people to understand what their responsibilities are, and then assuring them that you're going to go through a deliberate process, that they're going to be listened to, they're going to be heard, trying to create a safe space. I would rather spend more time making sure people understand that it's safe for you to say what you've got to say. It's kind of that go to Las Vegas, what stays in the room, it's said in the room stays in the room. So creating a space that's safe, where people are encouraged to participate, understanding their roles and responsibilities, and then moving ahead. I'm touchy-feely, it's never been me.
Yeah, I think it's good though to have a facilitator, kind of as you said, making sure that everybody's included in the discussion, right? So there's not the one board member that's taking over the discussion and it's their, their voice and not the entire, group. So
the facilitator, if in the beginning, and I just facilitated the session right before this, the first thing I said, my role is to make sure everybody participates in the conversation. When you have something to say it quickly and move on. But we want to hear from everybody. So creating that context helps a lot, Sherry.
Great. So then the next question, I volunteer for an organization with a working board that doesn't allow its board members to chair committees. Their claiming is the way boards are moving. And they said, I have searched and searched and have found nothing about this trend. Can you shed some light? Most of the board members don't even seem to agree with the decision, and I cannot figure out where this idea came from.
Well, it's certainly not an idea that I would embrace. That will lead a rubber stamp board very quickly.
Yeah.
That will deflate everybody's energy. It will take away from the contributions that they can make. To me, that's lazy. It's just not doing the due diligence. And the board has the fiduciary responsibility for the corporation.
That's right.
How can they not be the ones that are leading when it comes to setting strategy? Makes no sense.
Yeah. So here's a good one. How do you keep board and staff, quote unquote, in their lane and hold them accountable? Well,
this slide deck that you're all getting spells out those roles and responsibilities. You might want to go through here and just cherry pick out, half a dozen key points. Make sure that before you launch the process, that the board chair is on board with the staff as you recruit people to serve on the planning committee, orient them to it, include it in your new board member orientation. So before anything, somebody comes onto the board, cover it there. It's just understanding roles and responsibilities, reinforcing. The board chair has to be the one to police this. It can't be the CEO. You don't want to go there, but certainly the board chair has to be the one to help everybody stay in their lane at the volunteer level.
So the next question I have, in light of the current climate, do you recommend a strategic plan to be 2 to 3 years out versus 4 to 5 like they are generally? Have you seen any newer approaches such as treating a strategic plan more like a 2-year action plan? I've heard this suggestion, just wondering what your thoughts are. So Randall, this is a good question. Kevin and I, we wrote a book, Association 4.0, Positioning for Success in an Era of Disruption, and we interviewed several CEOs. And the CEO of Consumer Electronics said while they have a multi-year plan, they actually have kind of a one-pager year plan that they make sure that they review every single year. And you made the comment about being agile, and in my mind, I was like, that would be a good follow-up, and it kind of relates to this. Like, what is the time period for a plan? And then how do you implement something that then can get reviewed and you can be agile and keep people, moving in the same direction?
Yeah, it's really that cadence question we talked about before. If you're in an industry that's changing, just tumult, uncertainty, if it's that, you shorten up the planning horizon, shorten it up. Do some scenario, identify the key trends that are going on in your industry. Look at some alternative scenarios, and then you may cast a longer term vision, but I would shorten that up to a year, year and a half, 2 years. Implement it. Be prepared to adapt as you go along. Don't feel like just because we said we're going to do it, we have to do it. But that piece on scenario planning, where you get everybody looking at what might happen, doing some contingency planning, goes a long way. But whereas if you're in an industry like the U.S. soybean industry, a soybean's a soybean. In a case like that, they're looking out 20 years, 25 years. If you're in the futurist, if you're doing futurist work, you'll look out there. But in a disrupted environment, they kind of cut to the chase, shorten it up. Review it more frequently.
Yeah, great. So the next question is, given association budget limitations, what would you say is the most important investment in research? For example, original data collection, analysis of new or existing data, to support your association's strategic management for the benefit of the board and staff?
Well, that's really a function. I mean, do you have good quality data inside the organization that you can mine and drill down and understand? If that doesn't exist, then I'd put the research on looking to where the industry's going. What are the key drivers of the industry going forward? Try and match that up with any data that you've got. Use that as a way to share with people when they come onto the board or come onto the staff. But it's kind of really a function of your data repository that you have now, or is it just a lot of legacy data that really doesn't tell us much? Knowing what those handful of key performance indicators are and how the external environment's going to impact those, looking at what might happen is the best way I know to get that in an uncertain space. If you want to be agile, like laying out what we're going to do for the next 90 days, not what we're going to do over the next. We may have some 2-year objectives. This is where those OKRs come. But what are we going to do in the next 90 days? What does success look like? How do we know that we've accomplished it? Then 90 days later, be very transparent, share that across the organization, and lay, okay, now what are we going to do the next 90 days? Those are the principles that the Agile movement that started in project management and Silicon Valley, that kind of stuff, that's what they've taught us. Be clear about what you're going to do in the next 90 days that takes you to where you're trying to go, and then adapt, report out, adapt, share at the end of that time.
Yeah, I'll have to say that's probably, as anybody who's still hanging on here with us probably is thinking, yeah, that's probably our biggest challenge is that adapting, reviewing and adapting. And back to the point about the data, we do a lot of work in digital transformation and data governance, and that's the having valid data and good data is one major issue, right? So sometimes, looking at what is the competitive landscape, looking at the future of the profession, there's, are things changing within the profession? Like you said, soybean operator, whatever, like that may not change, but there's also other industries and medical association groups that are becoming more technical and are having to adapt. So what does that mean for the organization? And there's some, obviously there's some clear challenges today with the disruption that we've had already. And then now how do we, to manage through that? And then keep people always kind of thinking like, what's next and how do we adapt? So, so that were some good points. Any other questions? We can stay on a couple more minutes if anybody has any other questions. Someone more to comment, Randall has said, our core competencies, training on CEU and the chapters in governance cost a lot, but usually are not part of the strategy. That's a big issue too. Those are hard to cut, but take up time. That's our challenge. That's a challenge for a lot of folks, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Professional education, it's just, you've got to continue feeding that beast. It's refining the body of knowledge that goes with it, the certification exams, the whole processing. That's a lot of effort for little revenue. So yeah, I feel that pain, and I've felt that pain for a long time.
Yeah, and that's one of those sacred cows, I think, too, that some boards and execs want to try to cut back on those chapters and things like that, but it's a no-win. So, all right, great. Well, I don't see any other questions. So thanks for everyone for joining us. Thanks, Randall.